The Ahmed Kathrada Foundation says it's concerned about the state of South Africa's democracy. It says public money continues to be looted as the country grapples with the COVID-19 pandemic. The foundation says state-owned enterprises are barely functional, the criminal justice system under-resourced, and some towns and municipalities bankrupt. Ahead of Mandela Day, the foundation has been calling for ideas from the public on what action is needed to fix our democracy. More on this now. Let's bring in the foundation's head of Strengthening Democracy Unit, that's Zaakirah Vadi, who joins us via our telephone line. Zaakirah, thanks very much for joining us. Welcome to the AM report. So, functional democracies need functional states. Given that, do you think South Africa has a fighting chance against this pandemic?
I think that we do have a chance at fighting the pandemic if we can strengthen our democratic institutions at this point in time. I think it's important that public money going into fighting the COVID-19 virus is directed towards the right places where it's actually needed and intended. So that would be your hospitals, it would be areas of sanitization, developing sites of quarantine, perhaps bringing in PPE and ventilators. But when that money is diverted towards particular people, towards particular businesses in a way that's incorrect and it's against the law, I think that's when we begin to find a problem. And we've already seen that starting to happen. And that should be leading us to question what's wrong with our democratic institutions, what's wrong with the checks and balances that were supposed to be in place for that not to occur and not to happen. So I think that if we can get things right now, we have a chance at weathering the storm. But if not, then we're going to be in a very dire situation.
Frans Fanon speaks about the pitfalls of national consciousness in one of his books. And somewhere in that chapter, he mentions the relationship between political parties and the people over whom they govern as being a relationship of give and take. Reflect to us about this relationship, between political parties and the people over whom they govern, and how that's had an impact not only on our state of democracy, but also on the ways through which we've responded to this pandemic.
Well, I think it's a very important relationship because in South Africa we grapple with whether there's loyalty first to the political party or whether there's loyalty to the state and its people. And I think that debate cropped up a couple of years ago in relation to some political parties. And I think the people of South Africa at that time asserted in various ways through op-eds, through the media, that the loyalty should be to the voter, to the one who actually elects the person in power. And I think recent debates around electoral reform, about the Party Political Funding Act are both very important, and it brings about a bit more accountability for political parties themselves. I think another important point to mention is to whom do institutions account? Do they account, and these are state entities, do they account to political parties? Do they account to the ruling party? Or do they account to the institutions, to the committees that are set up via the state officially to look into them, to officially oversee the work that they are doing? So those are important debates that are emerging, and I think the South African public needs to be a bit more assertive about what they want from the elected representatives.
And then, of course, there's also a big debate about whether democracy is the best way to govern any country. But it appears that we, for the most part, have taken that as a basis very quickly. For the democracy to work, though, we need to have effective, meaningful collaboration. How does the foundation, I guess, suppose we can get that right?
Well, I think that's why we're calling for submissions at this point in time, because we want to hear from the public what do they think effective, meaningful contribution and participation in a democracy should look like. We don't see that happening effectively. I think if you see the state of particular municipalities that have collapsed, you see budgets that are being passed without citizen involvement, without any bit of monitoring from the public. You have parliamentarians that are in office but unquestioned. If you ask any South African at this point in time to list, apart from the cabinet, maybe 10 to 20 people who are in parliament who are not part of the cabinet, would they be able to do so? So do they know the elected representatives? Do they know what's taking place in different committees? And is there sufficient representation in those committees from members of the public who want to oversee important bills that are being passed? So I think those are all areas where democracy can be strengthened. And there may well be many, many more. And I think that's what we want to hear from the public in particular.
Zaakirah Vadi is with the Ahmed Kathrada Foundation. Thanks very much indeed for your time.